Okay, we're going to talk about the foundation for everything, which is the back squat. We always start with the back squat. It's the first movement we teach. It's important that we're doing it right because everything else we do in the weight room builds off of this. If you can have a strong core, strong hips, strong legs, that's your base, we'll be able to go from there. So let's just talk about setting up on the bar. Most important thing, again, is we want to make sure our hands are even. So any kind of overhead work we do, bench press, whatever it might be, our hands are always going to be in the same spot in terms of being even on the bar. So he's going to be slightly outside of that knurl, which is where that smooth and rough part meet. From there, he's going to put himself under the bar and get into a rack position. Okay? So now, go and step back a little bit more. When we get in this position, a couple things I want to make sure we understand. If I put my fingers between your shoulder blades, pinch my fingers. Okay, so you can see that widens his chest out, keeps him nice and strong. That lower back's locked in place, and now he's got a nice shelf for that bar to sit on. We never want to be in a soft back position where our shoulders are rolled. So always squeeze those shoulder blades behind us. In terms of our feet, he's going to be slightly wider than your hips. You're going to have to adjust yourself based on your body type. He's got a little bit longer legs than his upper frame, so he's got to go a little bit wider than what he normally would be comfortable with, okay? So where we start when we squat, I give you two commands, okay? Hips and then squat. The reason we do hips is when we squat, it's important that we are in our heels. We never want to squat heavy in our toes. So when I say hips, he's going to push those hips back, and that's going to force him to sit back and keep his knees behind his toes, okay? So let's see how he does. We're going to go hips, squat. Knees down, good. Hips, squat. Good, and that little bit of hip movement allows him to stay in his heels so his knees don't go forward. Don't do your hips this time and just go squat with your knees forward. Go. You can see he kind of gets on his toes and he gets off balance. So again, one more time with the proper way. Hips, squat. Good. And you can see that bar's traveling straight up and down. He's keeping his chest up. I like to see your eyes up at a 45. Everything follows our eyes. If our eyes go down, then that bar is going to go down as well. All right? Now, if we come back over here, a couple things. We talked about the knees staying behind the toes. So when we go hips, it keeps our knees behind our toes. The other important thing to look for is we want to make sure our knees are tracking over our toes. We do not want that knee coming inside. We call that valgus collapse, puts a lot of pressure through that ACL. So if you can imagine there's a couple pulls here, and I tell him hips, and then squat, those knees go outside those white pulls, and that gives those, allows those hips to open and allows that butt to drop down into that hole. Hips, squat. Good. Hips, squat. Good. Okay. Last thing I'd really encourage you, remember we talked about being on our heels. As you stand, really focus on driving through the heels. Okay, that will prevent you from coming forward and getting on those toes. Again, squat's the foundation. Start light. Okay, if you haven't done a lot of squats, it's better to be light and right than heavy and wrong. If we do one more, you all right? You getting tired?
No, I'm fine.
Okay. The biggest struggle people will find is they're not going to get low enough. Your hip joint is right about there. We want that hip joint below the knee joint when we finish on a squat. So if you go hips and squat, you can see that knee joint is above the hip joint and then up. And that's a pretty deep squat. I'll show you how far I actually need you to go without going that deep. So I'll tell you when to go up, all right? Hips, squat, up, right there. Okay, so you can see that you get that negative angle where the hip joint is below the knee joint. If you go into like a quarter squat, go half squat for me. Stop right there. If you're going here and stopping, go ahead and stand up and relax. You're going to build a really strong quad, but you're going to build a really weak hamstring and a really weak glute. And by default, you're going to have a really weak knee joint. So we got to make sure we're getting into that depth so you get that glute and you get that hamstring activated. Okay? So that is our squat. It's the foundation. Again, start light. Really focus on technique. If you're struggling with it, reach out to me. Send me video. I can give you feedback as we go. All right?